Is masculinity obsolete in the digital age? Well, yes and no. And I see people fall on two sides of this. So let's examine both sides and actually see what's fair here. So we certainly see a drop in masculinity in the modern age. This can be measured by testosterone levels, which have absolutely plummeted in the last 100 years since they've been measured, and probably before that. And certainly subjectively, if I see the average sort of soy boy in East London or Brooklyn, I am not impressed by his masculinity, and I don't think my granddad who fought on D-Day would be impressed by mine. There does seem to be a drop-off. Some of this is just the cycles of history. Hard times create strong men, weak times create influencers, something like that. That's some saying like that. We are living in this decadent time, and one feature of that is the reduction of masculinity. Don't worry, come the zombie apocalypse, masculinity will be in again, guys. However, unlike other cycles of history, we're also in a period of modernity and post-modernity. So the sort of gender blurring, the kind of lack of masculinity that's always happened in kind of the falls of civilizations like the fall of Rome had similar gender bending to now, but there was a different take to it. One, because kind of communism hadn't been established, and what we see is a sort of neo-communism and neo-Marxism influencing that gender ideology. And two, some of the tech just wasn't there. So for example, hormone blockers. These days, men can be kept passive and lacking masculinity through a series of chemical influences that just didn't exist in the past. The plastics in the water, blah, blah, blah. Is turning the frogs gay? The frogs are already gay. The frogs are like running a hair salon and telling you that this isn't pinkish, that this is in fact salmon. Also, the technology of distraction is there. Men can be hooked into sort of shallow dopamine pathways, whether it be doom scrolling or porn or any of the things that computer gaming that men tend to get hooked on. So it didn't exist in past times. You could also make a case that traditional masculine virtues are no longer needed. Well, let's look at that. So you might say that previously men were responsible for protection and provision and traditional masculine roles, and now that's no longer needed. The state protects you. We have the police, we have the army, we have rules and order in a way that we didn't used to have so much order before. And in terms of provision, we're all going to be provided for, right? We're all going to have state pensions and benefits and the minimum wage. Now, there's a bit of a case for that. We don't live in the Wild West. But it's pretty fragile. Civilization, I've seen this in areas of conflict, areas of civil strife around the world, can collapse pretty quickly. And certainly, do you think the police are going to turn up in time if someone bad comes to your door? That only has to happen once to ruin your life. Do you think that we're really going to get state pensions in the same degree when there's hardly any young people paying taxes given the birth rate decline? Now, what we could say is some traditional masculine virtues need to be transformed in the digital age. So courage, let's take courage, traditional masculine virtue. What does that look like now? It might not look like storming the beaches of Normandy anymore. It might not look like, the Greek heroes of old. Maybe it just means speaking the truth at work, even though you could get fired. What does courage look like in the modern digital context? Well, with laws in the UK, maybe it's just even speaking about these topics. Actually, I think in many ways, the bar of courage now is very low compared to my grandparents or the ancient Greeks or whoever. I think, what is required people say to me, I'm brave just for speaking words, for speaking words on the internet. I find it quite hilarious, really. So perhaps we're lucky. We live in an age where being masculine is actually kind of easier. What about just physical strength? Do we need that? Well, yes and no. So I think you could be a perfectly functional, successful man without having, six-pack abs. You don't need big pecs or whatever. I think this it makes me laugh a little bit when I see that that's the masculinity that's presented, because the essence of masculinity has gone down and down and down in our digital age. But yet somehow the presentation of it, the appearance of it is there. It's almost like an auto-trans masculinity. How can I put that? Like men dressed up as men, yeah? You'll see this in certain styles. It will either be like, super old school fashion, like a British gentleman, which is, great aesthetics, or like a lumberjack shirt, something with big beards. The hipsters, who are like one of the least masculine subcultures, were dressing as if they were lumberjacks. I mean, it's silly. How often will you be required as a man to be physically strong? Now, you could make the case to say, well, if it's just once in your life, you save the lives of your families from predatory people, maybe that's worth the martial arts, the weightlifting, etc. That's a fair case. But generally, you're not going to need it, right? Like, I don't know, I remember I was moving house recently. I was helping out the moving people I'd hired because I was like, well, why not? I'm here. And they were stronger than me, but I didn't feel emasculated because I was like, this is just not a part of my general life and job. And, the fact that I'm able to help them to some extent, this is fine. I didn't have to be the strongest guy doing that job. It's their job, not mine. And most jobs don't require that now. Now, what I would say is this. a lot of the character traits and virtues one can build through things like martial arts and weightlifting are probably more important than the actual being able to fight, being able to lift heavy things. So while traditional masculinity is not needed directly in the same way, you might not need to sort of be a kung fu warrior. I mean, you could be called upon, as I said, but generally not. You probably don't need to be physically strong. You may still need masculine virtues in the more extended sense. So strength becomes mental, emotional strength, strength to just get through the day in the mental health swamp that is modernity. Courage becomes, as I said, speaking out online, for example, speaking truth in this weird environment we're in. And while you might not need to, I don't know, provide by going fishing, for example, this guy's fishing over here. I mean, in the apocalypse maybe, but generally not. See, all these preppers are obsessed with these like trad masculine roles, and maybe they'll prove me wrong. It could happen, but I think generally it's just a little bit of cosplay. But here's the thing. That guy who goes fishing might just be at peace. He might manage his stress. That kind of nature connection he's going to get fishing, that sense of agency, of, being in charge of himself and bringing his food home. There might be a symbolism to that. There might be a mental health benefit to that. So a lot of traditional masculine pursuits are still worth doing. Not so much because in and of themselves the fish is that important, but what it brings to be a fisherman or a martial artist or someone who can grow food or whatever it is. Masculine virtues will never be obsolete. While many men are being literally replaced by robots currently, the idea that masculine virtue will no longer continue to be needed, I think, is an illusion. It's an illusion because society is very thin, it can break down at any point, and it's an illusion because of whatever technology is there, we need masculine men involved, making that technology, using that technology, fixing that technology, so those masculine virtues will always be needed. What we can say, though, as I've argued here, is masculinity can be misplaced. It can become the auto-trans masculine. It can become the sort of pretending to be a man, the illusion of being a man, the form of being a man. It's cosplaying as a man, the big muscles, the money, certain skills that seem to be almost overstressed in the manosphere here online, rather than how things look today. Let's take the 5 Ps. Protection, provision, pursuing mastery, persisting through hardship by resilience, and preserving the sacred order of the world. These things will always be needed. So the digital age hasn't killed masculinity, but it has changed the nature of the battlefield we're on with masculinity.